The music blared too loudly, the drinks were overly sugary, and I hated every minute of it. Jenna had dragged me to her company's annual Thanksgiving party, an event I'd successfully avoided every year until now. This time she hadn't just asked me to come, she demanded it. "It's important to me," she said in a tone that left no room for debate. Jenna was like that. When she wanted something, she got it. The venue was absurdly lavish, a rooftop lounge with glass walls and fake chandeliers. The city skyline stretched out in all directions, but all I felt was trapped. Jenna, on the other hand, was in her element. She commanded the room, laughing and tossing her head, back in that magnetic way that made people flock to her. I lingered near the bar, holding a drink I didn't even like, watching as she worked the crowd. She was stunning, dressed in a shimmering gown that caught the light with every move. I should have felt proud to call her my wife, but instead an uneasy knot tightened in my stomach. Something felt off. She had barely spoken to me all night except to snap, "Don't just stand there looking bored, Andrew. Try to socialize." Socialize with who? Her co-workers didn't care about me. I was just the husband, a forgettable +1. Jenna vanished into the crowd soon after, leaving me to stand awkwardly, feeling like a decorative prop. An hour passed, then two. I saw her flit from group to group, her glass perpetually full, her laughter a little too loud. My patience thinned. I thought about slipping out and texting her to take an Uber home, but something kept me rooted. Call it instinct. Call it stubbornness. I couldn't leave. Around midnight, I decided I'd had enough. I downed the last of my drink, checked my watch, and headed toward the exit. That's when I heard it, a muffled sound coming from the hallway near the restrooms. At first, I thought it was just some drunk couple messing around, but then I heard it again, soft, breathy, and unmistakable. My blood turned cold. Heart pounding, I moved toward the sound. The party's noise faded as I approached, replaced by rhythmic thumping and low whispers. One of the voices stopped me in my tracks. It was Jenna's. I froze, staring at the closed bathroom door, my mind racing to make sense of what I was hearing. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe it wasn't her, but deep down I knew. The door handle turned, and I leapt back, pressing myself against the wall. The door creaked open, and a man stepped out, adjusting his tie. I didn't recognize him, but his smug expression made my stomach churn. He didn't notice me. Then Jenna emerged. Her hair was disheveled, her lipstick smudged, her face flushed, but not from dancing. She was muttering something under her breath, laughing softly to herself. She didn't see me at first. When she finally turned her head and our eyes met, her smile vanished. "Andrew," she said sharply, her tone defensive, "what are you doing here?" I stared at her, my mouth dry, my fists clenched. "What am I doing here? What kind of question was that?" I opened my mouth, desperate to say something, but no words came out. Then, as if she hadn't just walked out of a bathroom with another man, she rolled her eyes. "You're overreacting," she muttered, brushing past me like I was the problem. I stood there, stunned. Apologize, beg for forgiveness. That wasn't what I got. Instead, she treated me like I was an inconvenience, like I was the one ruining the night. The sheer audacity of it hit me like a freight train. Before I realized it, my legs were moving. "Jenna!" I called, my voice cutting through the party's noise. Heads turned, but she didn't stop. She was already halfway across the room, weaving through the crowd as if nothing had happened. I shoved past people, ignoring their startled glances and mumbled complaints, my focus locked on her. She reached the bar, grabbed a fresh drink, and acted like the incident had never occurred. My chest tightened with rage as I closed the distance. "Jenna!" I called again, louder this time. She finally turned, her expression a mix of irritation and annoyance. Not fear, not guilt, just pure annoyance, like I was embarrassing her in front of her precious colleagues. "Can we not do this here?" she hissed, her voice sharp and low. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, and forced a smile for the onlookers. You're making a scene. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and unsteady. A scene? Are you serious right now? I'm making a scene. What about what just happened back there? Her eyes narrowed into slits as she leaned in close, speaking through gritted teeth. Lower your voice, Andrew. Why? I snapped, not bothering to hide my anger. So no one finds out what you were doing in the bathroom? Because I'm sure they'd love to know what their queen of the party gets up to behind closed doors. Her face went pale for a moment, and I hoped that I'd finally broken through her indifference. But then she straightened her posture, her voice icy. You don't know what you're talking about, she said, her tone measured and dismissive. And even if you did, this isn't the time or place. Go home, Andrew. You've clearly had too much to drink. I stared at her, stunned. She wasn't just denying it. She was gaslighting me, acting like I was some drunken fool imagining things. Before I could respond, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I turned to find one of her co-workers, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a polished smile that didn't reach his eyes. Everything okay here? He asked, his tone polite but laced with passive aggression. Everything's fine, Jenna said quickly, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. My husband was just leaving. I shook his hand off, my anger boiling over. No, I'm not leaving. Not until she explains what I just saw. The co-worker's gaze flicked between us, his discomfort obvious. Maybe you two should take this outside, he suggested. Great idea, I snapped, glaring at Jenna. Let's go outside, Jenna. Right now. Her jaw tightened as she glared at me, but after a moment she downed the rest of her drink, slammed the glass on the bar, and stormed toward the exit. I followed, the cold night air hitting me like a slap as we stepped outside. The city buzzed around us, honking cars, distant laughter, but it all felt muted, drowned out by the roaring in my ears. Jenna spun around to face me, her breath visible in the chilly air. Are you happy now? She snapped. You've embarrassed both of us in front of my colleagues. God, Andrew, why can't you just stop? Stop? I interrupted, my voice trembling. I don't want your excuses, Jenna. I want the truth. Who the hell was that guy? Her lips parted as if to answer, but no sound came out. For a second I thought she might actually tell me. But then her face hardened, her arms crossing tightly over her chest. It's not what you think, she said finally, her voice clipped. In a locked bathroom? I shot back, my tone biting. That's funny because it sure didn't sound like talking. She rolled her eyes, dismissing me like I was the unreasonable one. You're blowing this out of proportion. I don't have time for your insecurities right now, Andrew. Go home. Sleep it off. Her words hit me like another slap. She wasn't just lying. She was dismissing me entirely, refusing to acknowledge what she'd done. You really think I'm that stupid? The music pounded too loudly, the drinks were overly sugary, and I despised every moment of it. Jenna had insisted I come to her company's annual Thanksgiving party this year, a gathering I usually managed to avoid. It's important to me, she'd said firmly, her tone leaving no room for refusal. Jenna always got what she wanted when she set her mind to it. The venue was ostentatiously upscale, a rooftop lounge surrounded by glass walls and adorned with fake chandeliers. The city skyline stretched out in every direction, yet I felt suffocated. Jenna, in stark contrast, was in her element. She commanded attention, laughing and tossing her head back in a way that drew people to her like moths to a flame. I lingered near the bar, holding a drink I didn't like, watching as she worked the room. She looked incredible, dressed in a shimmering gown that caught the light with every move. I should have felt proud to call her my wife, but unease gnawed at me. Something was off. She'd barely spoken to me all evening, other than to snap. Don't just stand there looking bored, Andrew. Try to socialize. Socialize with whom? Her colleagues didn't care about me. I was just the husband, a forgettable +1. Jenna disappeared into the crowd shortly after, leaving me standing there feeling like an accessory. An hour passed, then 2. I watched her glide from group to group, her glass never empty, her laughter just a little too loud. My patience wore thin. I considered leaving, slipping out and texting her to catch an Uber home. But something held me back. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe instinct. I couldn't bring myself to leave. Close to midnight, I decided I'd had enough. I finished my drink, checked my watch, and headed toward the exit. That's when I heard it, a muffled sound coming from the hallway near the restrooms. At first, I assumed it was just some intoxicated couple messing around, but then I heard it again. Soft, breathy, and unmistakable. My stomach dropped. Heart pounding, I crept toward the sound. The party's noise faded with each step, replaced by rhythmic thumping and low whispers. Then I recognized one of the voices. It was Jenna's. I froze, staring at the closed bathroom door, my mind racing to make sense of what I was hearing. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe it wasn't her. But deep down, I knew the truth. The door handle turned, and I instinctively pressed myself against the wall. The door creaked open, and a man stepped out, adjusting his tie. I didn't recognize him, but the smug look on his face made my blood boil. He didn't notice me. Then Jenna appeared. Her hair was disheveled, her lipstick smeared, and her face was flushed, not from dancing. She muttered something under her breath, laughing softly. She didn't see me at first. When our eyes finally met, her smile vanished. "Andrew," she said sharply, her tone defensive, "what are you doing here?" I stared at her, my fists clenched, my mouth dry. What am I doing here? What kind of question was that? I tried to speak, but no words came out. Then, as if nothing had happened, she rolled her eyes. "You're overreacting," she muttered, brushing past me like I was the problem. I stood there, frozen, stunned by her audacity. Apologize? Beg for forgiveness? That wasn't what I got. Instead, she dismissed me entirely, as though I were an inconvenience. Her words replayed in my head as I stood there, rooted to the spot. "Fine, believe whatever you want." It was a dismissal, not a denial. She didn't even try to explain. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by disbelief, before the sound of the party's door swinging open jolted me. A voice broke through the haze. "You good, man?" I turned to see one of Jenna's younger colleagues, someone I'd met briefly at previous events. His expression was a mix of concern and hesitation, like he didn't want to get involved but felt he had to say something. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice flat. He glanced in the direction Jenna had gone. She left pretty quick. "Everything okay between you two?" I wanted to scream at him, tell him to mind his own business, but instead I just shook my head. "It's nothing. Go back inside." He nodded awkwardly and disappeared, leaving me alone again. By the time I worked up the nerve to follow Jenna, she was gone. I scanned the street, hoping to catch sight of her, but the sidewalk was empty. She must have grabbed a cab, vanishing into the city like a ghost. I pulled out my phone and called her. It rang twice before going straight to voicemail. I tried again with the same result. Either she'd blocked me or turned off her phone. Either way, she didn't want to be found. The fury boiling inside me was almost too much to contain. I wanted to hit something, anything, but instead I forced myself to breathe. Not yet, I thought. Don't lose it now. I turned back toward the venue. I wasn't done. Inside, the party continued, the crowd oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded outside. My eyes scanned the room until they landed on him, the man who had walked out of the bathroom with my wife. He was at the bar, laughing with a group of guys, his tie loosened, a whiskey in his hand. He looked far too pleased with himself. My heart pounded as I marched over. He didn't notice me until I was standing directly in front of him, blocking his view. "Can I help you?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. His tone was calm, casual, as if I were some random stranger interrupting his fun. "You can tell me what the hell you were doing with my wife," I said, my voice low but seething. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning, cocky and infuriating. "I think you've got the wrong guy." "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "I saw you. I heard you and Jenna in the bathroom. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. The group around him fell silent, their eyes darting between us like spectators at a car crash. He set his drink down, his expression hardening. Look, man, I don't know what you think you saw, but you're out of line. Out of line? I took a step closer, my fists clenched. You're screwing my wife and I'm out of line? The room seemed to freeze. Conversations died and all eyes turned toward us. I could feel their stares, but I didn't care. Let them watch. Keep your voice down, he said, his tone shifting to one of warning. You don't want to do this here. Why not? I shot back, afraid someone might find out what you are. A liar, a homewrecker. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might hit me. Part of me hoped he would. I wanted a reason. But instead he leaned in, his voice a low whisper. You don't know what you're talking about. Go home and sort this out with your wife. He turned to leave, but I grabbed his arm, spinning him back around. Don't walk away from me. Andrew, Jenna's voice cut through the tension like a knife. I turned to see her standing by the door, her face a mix of fury and something else. For the first time, she looked genuinely rattled. Stop it, she snapped, storming toward us. What the hell do you think you're doing? What am I doing? I shouted, my anger boiling over. What the hell are you doing, Jenna, with him? Her voice was quiet, almost pleading, as she said, It wasn't what you think. She took a step closer, the shift in her tone meant to disarm me. It was nothing, Andrew. A stupid mistake. We drank too much and things got out of hand, but it didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything, I repeated, my voice hollow. Do you even hear yourself? You cheated on me, Jenna. You betrayed me. Do you have any idea how that feels? She sighed, exasperated, as though I were being unreasonable. Andrew, I'm sorry, okay? I messed up. But do you really want to throw everything away over one stupid incident? Over something that didn't even go that far? Her words felt like a slap to the face. Didn't go that far, I echoed, disbelief flooding my voice. You expect me to believe that after what I heard? She threw her hands up in frustration, her voice rising. What do you want me to say, that I'm a horrible person? Fine, I screwed up, but it's not like I've been sneaking around behind your back for years. It was one time, one mistake. The sheer audacity of her response made my blood boil. One mistake, I shot back, my voice growing louder. You actually expect me to believe this is the first time, that this is the only thing you've kept from me? Her glare hardened, her jaw tightening. What do you want from me, Andrew? She snapped. To get down on my knees and beg for forgiveness? Will that make you happy? I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, and realized she was a stranger now. Her unapologetic defiance, the way she dared me to make the next move. It was like she had become someone else overnight. No, I said finally, my tone icy. What I want is the truth, all of it. No more half-hearted excuses, no more lies. The truth, Jenna, or we're done. She hesitated, her eyes flickering away from mine for a brief moment. When she looked back, there was a hardness there I'd never seen before. You want the truth, she said, her voice steady, almost mocking. Fine. You're right, Andrew. I haven't been happy for a long time. And yes, I've been spending time with Greg because, unlike you, he actually listens to me. He makes me feel alive. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer, stealing the breath from my lungs. I couldn't speak, couldn't think. Do you have any idea what it's like, she continued, her voice rising, to feel invisible in your own marriage? To be stuck with someone who doesn't even notice you anymore? That's not fair, I managed to say, my voice trembling. I've always been there for you. Always. She laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and hollow. Being there physically isn't the same as being present, Andrew. And honestly, maybe this is on you as much as it is on me. Her words struck like a physical blow, leaving me reeling. You're unbelievable, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Absolutely unbelievable. She shrugged, her face a mask of infuriating calm. Believe what you want. But don't pretend you're some innocent victim in all of this." With that, she turned and began walking away again, leaving me standing there, shattered. Her steps were deliberate, her back straight, as though she hadn't just torn my world apart in minutes. My chest felt like it was caving in, a suffocating mix of rage and heartbreak clawing at my throat. "Jenna!" I shouted, my voice raw. "Don't you dare walk away from me again!" She stopped, turning slowly to face me, her expression unreadable under the harsh glow of the streetlights. For a moment we stood there in silence, the tension between us almost tangible. "What do you want from me, Andrew?" she asked, her tone calm, too calm. "You've already made up your mind, haven't you? Nothing I say will change that." "I want answers," I said, stepping closer, my fists clenched at my sides. "Real answers, not deflection, not this nonsense about feeling invisible. How long has this been going on? How many times? Who else?" She let out a sharp, bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You think this is some elaborate conspiracy? That I've been running around with every guy who pays me attention? You're paranoid, Andrew. You're always looking for something that isn't there." "Don't gaslight me," I snapped, the anger spilling over. "I'm not paranoid, and you know it. I caught you, Jenna. Stop acting like you're the victim here." Her eyes flashed with fury, and she took a step toward me. "You want the truth? Fine. I've been unhappy for years, Andrew. Years. And maybe I didn't handle it the right way, but you sure as hell didn't notice, did you? You were too wrapped up in your own life to care about mine." "I didn't notice because you never said anything," I shot back, my voice cracking. "How the hell am I supposed to fix something if you don't tell me it's broken?" She laughed again, bitter and cutting. "You think a couple of date nights or compliments would have fixed this? It's not that simple. We've been living like roommates, Andrew. You don't touch me, you don't talk to me unless it's about bills or groceries. You checked out a long time ago, and I'm done pretending that's enough for me." Her words stung, but I wasn't letting her off that easily. "So your solution was to cheat?" I asked, my voice low and venomous. "To sneak around with Greg instead of talking to me, instead of working on this? Did you even want to fix it, or were you just waiting for an excuse to blow it all up?" Her mask cracked for just a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "You don't get it," she said quietly. "You'll never get it." "No, Jenna, I get it," I said, my voice shaking with restrained fury. "You want it out? Fine, say that. Be honest about it. But don't you dare stand there and blame me for your choices. You made this mess, not me." The street was silent except for the occasional car passing by. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression softening ever so slightly. For a moment I thought she might actually feel remorse. "Maybe you're right," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe I did make this mess. But it's not just mine to clean up, Andrew. It's ours. And I don't think you're ready to hear that." "Don't," I said, my voice breaking. "Don't you dare try to make this mutual. This isn't us. This is you." For the first time, her facade cracked completely. Her lips trembled, and I thought she might cry. But instead, she turned and walked away once more, leaving me standing in the cold, utterly alone. Her shoulders stiffened. "Go home, Andrew," she said, her voice wavering but firm. "We'll talk when you're ready to have a real conversation." I stared at her, my hands trembling with the urge to shake her, to force her to confront what she'd done. But I didn't move, couldn't move, because deep down I already knew. She wasn't going to give me the answers I needed, not tonight and maybe not ever. She turned and walked away, her figure fading into the night, leaving me rooted in place, the weight of her words and the remains of a marriage that felt irreparably broken pressing down on me. I couldn't go home, not yet. The thought of sitting in that house, the one we had built together while she was out doing who knows what with who knows who, was unbearable. Instead, I drove. No destination, no plan, just endless stretches of highway as the city lights blurred into streaks of orange and white. Her words played on a loop in my head, twisting into sharp daggers that stabbed deeper each time they resurfaced. You don't touch me. You don't talk to me. You checked out a long time ago. Had I really been so blind, so distant, that she felt she had no choice but to seek something elsewhere? Number. That was just another excuse, a flimsy deflection to shift the blame. She could have spoken up. She could have been honest. Instead, she chose to betray me. The thought sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through me, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. I needed answers, real ones. Not the evasions she'd given me earlier, breadcrumbs meant to string me along. I pulled into a gas station parking lot, my heart racing as I unlocked my phone. Her messages had been strangely quiet in recent weeks, devoid of the casual updates or random jokes we used to share, but I still had access to her phone account, something we'd set up years ago for convenience. I logged in, and the list of recent calls and texts appeared before me, stark and undeniable. Greg's name was everywhere. Dozens of calls, most late at night when I thought she was working late or at the gym. Even more texts, some flagged as pictures. The timestamps aligned perfectly with the nights she had come home distant, her excuses tired and barely believable. But it didn't stop there. There was another number, unfamiliar, unlisted, with an area code I didn't recognize. More calls, more texts. My stomach churned as I pieced together a timeline of deceit that stretched far longer than I wanted to believe. The incident in the bathroom wasn't a single mistake. It was just the tip of an iceberg I hadn't seen until now. I stared at the phone in my hand, trembling. Part of me wanted to hurl it against the dashboard, to destroy the proof and pretend this wasn't real. But I couldn't. I needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I dialed the unknown number. It rang twice before a groggy voice answered. Hello? I couldn't speak at first, my throat tight with fury. When I finally found my voice, it was cold and sharp. Who is this? There was a pause, then the sound of rustling sheets. Who's asking? I'm Andrew, I said, each word clipped. Jenna's husband. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, finally, oh. The voice shifted, no longer groggy but guarded. Listen, man, I don't think... Save it, I snapped. I know what's been going on. I just want to hear you admit it. How long? He sighed, the kind of sigh that carried irritation rather than regret. Look, I didn't know she was married at first, okay? She didn't tell me until later, and by then, we'd already... Already what? I growled, my knuckles whitening as I gripped the phone. Already been seeing each other, he finished, his tone defensive now. She said things were complicated between you two, that you weren't really together anymore. I laughed bitterly. That's the story she gave you? That we weren't really together? Well, yeah, he replied, a note of defiance creeping into his voice. Honestly, the way she talked about you, it sounded like you barely cared about her, like you were more of a roommate than a husband. His words hit harder than I expected, but I shoved the sting aside. How long? I asked again, my tone flat and unrelenting. 6 months, he admitted after a pause. But it's been over for a while now. She ended it weeks ago. Look, man, I'm sorry. I hung up before he could finish. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of sneaking around, of her letting me believe everything was fine while she led a double life. And that was just him. God only knew how long things with Greg had been going on, or if there were others. I sat in the parking lot, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of it all. The woman I loved, the woman I had trusted with everything, had been deceiving me for months, maybe even years. For what? Because I didn't touch her enough? Because I didn't talk to her the way Greg or this other guy did? None of it justified what she'd done. As my anger swirled into a tempest inside me, another thought surfaced, quiet but insistent. What if this was only the beginning? What else was I about to uncover, and was I ready for it? By the time I pulled into the driveway, the adrenaline from the call had faded, leaving a hollow ache in my chest and a gnawing pit in my stomach. The house was dark and silent, waiting for the storm I knew was coming. Jenna's car wasn't there. She hadn't come home, and I had no idea where she was. But it didn't matter. I wasn't ready to see her yet. I headed to our bedroom, flipping on the light and staring at the space we'd shared for years. The bed, the photos on the dresser, the decorative pillows she insisted we buy. It all felt alien now, like it belonged to a life I no longer recognized. Her laptop sat on her desk, the screen dark but taunting. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but pride didn't matter anymore. I needed the truth, all of it. If she wouldn't give it to me, I'd find it myself. It only took a minute to guess her password, her childhood dog's name, and her birth year. The screen unlocked, and I dove in. Emails, browser history, messages, anything that might fill in the gaps she refused to acknowledge. The emails were the worst. Dozens of threads with Greg filled with inside jokes, late-night plans, and pictures. I didn't open the photos. I didn't need to. The captions were enough. Thinking about last night. Can't wait to see you again. You look so good in that dress today. I could barely concentrate. But one email stopped me cold. When are you telling him? The timestamp was from weeks ago, long before the bathroom, long before tonight's catastrophe. She wasn't just cheating. She had been planning her escape, crafting a narrative where she was the victim, leaving me in the wreckage. I slammed the laptop shut, my breath ragged, my hands trembling. I couldn't sit still. I paced the bedroom, running my hands through my hair, trying to calm the whirlwind inside me. But it was no use. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, heard her laugh, imagined her with Greg, or the stranger from earlier. The walls felt like they were closing in. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside, letting the frigid air hit me like a slap. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that comes when the world is asleep, and you're the only one left awake, haunted by your demons. I walked aimlessly with no destination in mind, replaying every interaction with Jenna from the past year. The late nights she claimed were for work, the sudden obsession with the gym, the way her phone was always in her hand, tilted just out of my view. It was all so glaringly obvious now, but at the time I trusted her. I believed in her. That trust was now shattered, replaced by a heavy darkness I couldn't shake. Eventually, I found myself in a park near our house, seated on a bench under the faint glow of a street lamp. The cold air seeped through my coat, but I didn't feel it. My gaze stayed fixed on the ground as I tried to figure out my next move. Leaving her felt like the natural choice. She had destroyed everything we had, lied to my face, and disrespected me in ways I couldn't even begin to comprehend. But the thought of walking away, of abandoning the life we'd built, filled me with a grief I wasn't ready to confront. I needed to face her, not to argue or yell, but to tear down the facade she was hiding behind and uncover the whole truth. If she wasn't willing to give it to me, I'd take it myself. As I sat there, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting Jenna to finally reach out, ready to admit everything. But it wasn't her. It was Greg. The message was short, but it hit like a bullet. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. I had no idea what he wanted to say, but ignoring him wasn't an option. My fingers moved before my mind could process. "Fine," I replied. "Where?" His response came quickly, with an address to a bar on the far side of town. It wasn't a place I'd ever been to, but I didn't hesitate. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, stood up, and started walking toward my car. If Greg wanted to talk, I was ready. But I wasn't leaving without answers. The bar was hidden on a quiet side street, the kind of place that didn't advertise but always seemed to attract a crowd. A buzzing neon sign cast a faint red glow over the entrance. I parked across the street and sat in the car for a moment, staring at the door. My chest felt tight, the air in the car suffocating. What did Greg want? Was he about to confess everything? Was he going to beg me not to ruin his life? Or was this his way of staking his claim now that my marriage was crumbling? Whatever his reason, I was ready. I stepped out of the car and walked into the bar, the stale smell of beer and cheap cologne assaulting my senses. The dim lighting and low, forgettable music only added to the dreary atmosphere. I scanned the room until I saw him sitting alone in a corner booth, a beer in front of him. Greg looked up as I approached, his face unreadable. He motioned to the empty chair across from him. "Andrew," he greeted with a nod. I sat down, leaning back in the chair with my arms crossed. "Start talking," I said, my tone cold and steady. He sighed, running a hand over the back of his neck. "I didn't ask you here to fight," he began. I think you deserve to know what's really going on." "That's funny," I said with a bitter laugh, "because my wife doesn't seem to think I deserve the truth. So go ahead, Greg, enlighten me." He winced at the sharpness in my voice, but didn't argue. Instead, he took a sip of his beer and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "This thing with Jenna, it's complicated. Spare me the cliches," I snapped. "How long?" His eyes dropped to the table. "Almost a year," he admitted softly. The words hit like a punch, but I didn't flinch. "So the bathroom wasn't the first time?" "No," he admitted, shaking his head. "It wasn't." My jaw clenched, my nails digging into my palms under the table. "And you didn't think it was important to let me know my wife was screwing around with you for an entire year?" "I didn't know she was married at first," he said defensively. "She didn't tell me. I only found out a few months in, but by then I was already—" "Already what?" I pressed, my voice razor sharp. "In love with her." He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I fell for her. I know it was wrong, but I couldn't stop." My stomach churned, but I kept my expression neutral. "And now," I asked, "are you still in love with her?" His fingers tapped nervously on the table before he shook his head. "No," he admitted. "Not anymore. Things started falling apart between us a few weeks ago. She said she didn't want to see me anymore." "Why?" He let out a humorless laugh. "She said she wanted to fix things with you, that she didn't want to throw away her marriage." Her words echoed in my mind. Jenna hadn't said any of that to me. No apologies, no attempts to repair the damage, just anger, blame, and denial. "Did she tell you about the other guy?" I asked suddenly, my voice like ice. Greg blinked in surprise. "What other guy?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You really thought you were the only one? God, you're even dumber than I thought." His face darkened, but instead of snapping back, he slumped in his chair, defeated. "I guess I shouldn't be surprised," he muttered. "She's complicated." "Complicated," I repeated mockingly. "That's one way to put it." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation pressing down on both of us. Finally, Greg spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Look," he said, meeting my eyes, "I'm not trying to excuse what I did. I screwed up. But Jenna, she's not who you think she is. She's been playing both of us." I stared at him, my anger warring with a growing sense of unease. "What do you mean?" He leaned back, his expression grim. "She's not just looking for attention, Andrew. She's looking for control. She played me against you just like she's probably playing you against someone else. She doesn't care about either of us, just herself." His words lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to argue, to defend her, but the evidence was undeniable. Jenna wasn't just a cheater, she was a manipulator. And in that moment I realized this wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the person she truly was, someone I'd been too blind to see. I stood, grabbing my coat. "Thanks for the chat, Greg," I said, my voice cold. "But I think I've heard enough." He didn't try to stop me as I left. The cold night air hit me like a slap, jolting me awake. I wasn't just losing my wife, I was losing the illusion of the life I thought we'd shared. I drove home in silence, the streetlights streaking past like faint reminders of a world that continued moving while mine fell apart. Greg's words echoed in my head. She's been playing both of us. She doesn't care about either of us. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was there, and my stomach tightened. She had returned. Stepping into the dimly lit house, I noticed the faint glow of the kitchen light. Jenna sat at the table, a glass of wine in front of her, her phone resting on the counter nearby. She didn't glance up as I entered, her gaze fixed on the swirling wine in her glass. "You've been busy," I said, shutting the door behind me. My tone was calm, too calm. Her head jerked up, her eyes narrowing. "Where have you been?" "Out," I replied flatly, tossing my keys on the counter and kicking off my shoes. "Where were you?" Her lips tightened into a thin line. "I went for a drive. I needed to clear my head after everything." "Everything?" I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. "You mean getting caught with Greg, or the fact that your little side games are falling apart?" She stiffened, her grip tightening around the glass. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, come on, Jenna," I said, leaning against the counter. "Greg told me everything. A year with him, and you still think you can play innocent?" Her face faltered briefly before she recovered, her expression hardening. "So you met with Greg," she said coldly. "What did he tell you? That I'm some kind of monster? That I'm the only one to blame for this mess?" "You are to blame," I snapped. "Don't twist this around. You lied to me. You cheated. Not just with him, apparently. How many others, Jenna? How many more?" Her eyes flared with anger as she slammed the glass onto the table. "I don't owe you a confession, Andrew," she said sharply. "You're not perfect in this marriage either. Don't act like you've been some saint." "Don't you dare," I said, my voice rising. "Don't you dare try to spin this around on me. I've been here. I've been faithful. Meanwhile, you've been out there screwing around with anyone who gave you attention." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You think it's that simple? That I just woke up one day and decided to cheat? Do you have any idea what it's like to live with someone who doesn't see you, who doesn't make you feel like you matter?" "I didn't see you," I shouted back. "I didn't make you feel like you mattered. What do you think I've been doing all these years? Paying the bills, planning trips, building a life with you. Was that not enough?" "It's not about the bills or the trips," she yelled. "It's about how you make me feel. Or don't, rather. You've been so wrapped up in your own world, Andrew. You didn't even notice me slipping away." Her words stung, but I refused to let them land. I'd heard enough excuses, enough blame-shifting. "This isn't about me," I said firmly, my voice low but resolute. "This is about you, about the choices you made, the lies you told. You destroyed this marriage, Jenna. Not me." For a moment she seemed to deflate, sinking back into her chair. Her defiance dimmed, replaced by something softer but no less stubborn. "Fine," she said quietly. "I made mistakes, but don't act like you're some victim here. We both know this marriage hasn't been working for a long time." I stared at her, my chest tightening. "If it wasn't working, you should have said something," I said, my voice heavy with frustration. "You should have talked to me. We could have fixed it. Instead, you decided to burn it all down behind my back." She looked away, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "Maybe I didn't think it was fixable," she admitted softly. Her words hung in the air like a death knell. I took a step back, the weight of it all crashing down on me. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't keep pretending there's something left to save." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Andrew." "No," I interrupted, cutting her off. "This is done, Jenna. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." For the first time all night, she seemed truly shaken. Her small frame slumped as though the weight of her actions had finally caught up to her. But I didn't care anymore. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her in the faint glow of the overhead light, her carefully constructed facade finally cracking. The bedroom was colder than it should have been, even with the heater on. I leaned against the closed door for a moment, letting the silence envelop me. My chest felt tight, my mind racing, but for the first time that night I had clarity. This was over. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and began packing. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, just enough to get by for a few days. Each item I tossed into the bag felt like another piece of my life crumbling away. A life I had believed was secure, stable. The door creaked open behind me. I turned to see Jenna standing there, her face pale, her eyes tired. She wasn't the defiant woman from earlier. Now she just looked worn out. "You're leaving," she said softly, her voice barely audible. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I replied simply, zipping the bag shut. She stepped into the room, clasping her hands together like she didn't know what else to do. "Where are you going?" "To clear my head," I said, slinging the bag over my shoulder. "To get some space from all this." She nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I didn't think it would end like this," she murmured. "Neither did I said, brushing past her. "But you made that decision for both of us, didn't you?" Her head snapped up, and for a moment it looked like she might argue. But instead her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I let out a bitter laugh. "Jenna, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed us. And for what? For Greg? For whoever else? Was it worth it?" She didn't answer. The silence between us was suffocating. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "Andrew, I know I messed up. I know I broke your trust. But I still love you." Her words made my chest tighten, but anger flared up just as quickly. "You don't get to say that," I said sharply. "Not after everything you've done. Love isn't just a word, Jenna. It's actions. And your actions told me everything I need to know." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not anymore. "I'll stay somewhere else tonight," I said, heading for the door. "You can have the house for now. I'll figure out what happens next." Her fingers brushed my arm as I passed. "Andrew, please, can we just talk? Really talk?"